Hi everyone, I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Chris Raggi. Federal investigators say the Amtrak train that derailed yesterday in Washington was traveling more than 50 miles per hour over the speed limit before the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board says the train was clocked going that fast in a 30-mile-per-hour zone. The crash killed 3 people and injured dozens others.
It was the first ever service from Seattle to Portland on a new route that was supposed to shave off around 10 minutes. The train was going around a curve over Interstate 5 when 12 passenger cars derailed. David Begnaud is in DuPont, where investigators are sifting through the wreckage.
Ground crews spent all day and night stabilizing the scene where the Amtrak passenger train derailed during morning rush hour, plunging rail cars off of the tracks and onto the freeway below.
Amtrak 501, emergency, we are on the ground.
Dispatch calls from the engineer captured the terror for the 80 passengers and 6 crew members on board.
Is everybody okay? I'm still figuring that out. We got cars everywhere and down onto the highway.
People were screaming, it was crazy.
Adrian Thompson says it was his first time on a train in years.
And all of a sudden I just feel a whole bunch of turning and rocking of the train, and I just grabbed onto the chair in front of me for dear life. My laptop went flying, my phone went flying.
You start to see the roof kind of, peel, and you're just like, is this ever going to stop? And it stopped. And when it stopped, it was completely black.
The train had left Seattle, headed for Portland. This was its first run on a faster new route, designed to shave off about 10 minutes. The National Transportation Safety Board says the train was traveling 80 miles per hour ahead of the curve over the interstate, where the speed limit drops to 30. At about 7:34 local time, the train approached the overpass where one of the engines and 12 cars derailed.
It wasn't easy for the firefighters to get through. They were using jaws of life and different forms of saws to be able to get into some of the crushed cars to get access to people and get them out.
The NTSB will now try and figure out whether something other than speed played a role in the crash.
Is there any indication there was an object on the tracks prior to the derailment?
That remains to be determined. The scene has been preserved, and we will be looking at it very carefully with all of our rail experts.
Let's bring in Gus Ubaldi. He's an airport and railroad civil engineer, and he joins us from Ohio. Mr. Ubaldi, thank you for taking the time. We were just asking David Begnaud about PTC, the positive train control, and it wasn't activated here at this portion of the track where the speed limit came down to 30 miles per hour. Why would that not be the case? If it was available, why would it not be enacted?
Well, because there are 2 parts to it. One is train-borne. The other part is wayside. The train has to know where it is. You have to have transmitters, various devices in the track so that the train knows where it's at. You have to code it. It's not unlike these automatic parking things that you have on your car. You can have it on your car, but supposing you had to have some sort of feature with every parking space. So it takes time to implement. Remember, it's safety critical, so it has to work. It has to work every time. It has to work flawlessly, and so it takes time to implement.
So we're still trying to find out, obviously, what caused this accident. But what we do know is that the train hit that 30-mile-per-hour curve going 80 miles per hour. If it turns out that the engineer, for whatever reason, neglected, ignored the warning signs to slow down, what can we do to prevent this? Is there anything other than this technology that you were just talking about that can be implemented so that something like this doesn't happen again?
Well, actually, there is. And I find this quite bizarre every time this comes up. There's technology that can do that that's been around for decades. I was installing it on the Cleveland Regional Transit Authority over 30 years ago. Actually, Amtrak had it installed going southbound north of Philadelphia for the 2015 Frankfurt Curve collision, but didn't have it installed going northbound, and installed it within a week. It's older technology, not quite the bells and whistles, the colorful high-tech toy that PTC with GPS is, but it's available. And I'm surprised that the Congress, the FRA, the NTSB doesn't just say, let's just put in standard cab signaling and forget about the little trinkets that go along with positive train control.
So what would that do? Would it alert the engineer that they're going too fast? It wouldn't slow the train down, but what would it do?
Oh, yes, it will.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it will. What it does is it alerts the engineer. The engineer then has to acknowledge it, and he then has to take some sort of action, apply the brake to a particular setting. If he doesn't, the train will do it for him.
So why, if it's something that is this simple, and it seems to probably be, from what you're saying, more cost effective than PTC, why isn't something like this done? Why something so common sense and so, from the way you're describing it, just so rudimentary, why isn't this done?
Because PTC, the requirement for PTC asks for more. It asks for it to be interoperable, which means that whatever system is put in on the Burlington Northern Santa Fe will also work on the Union Pacific or work on CSX. Let me just give you an example. Back when the Pennsylvania and the New York Central merged, they had similar type systems back then, but they didn't talk to each other. And so you had to have a working New York Central locomotive on New York Central territory, otherwise the train couldn't run because the systems didn't talk to each other. So that's what's required of PTC. It's required that it be GPS based. It's required that it does other things other than simply slow the train down. And so if someone did what I would suggest, they would not be complying with the law.
That is really interesting and actually, quite frankly, quite frustrating to hear when you consider, you know, the number of people that died here, when you consider the 2015 derailment in Philadelphia, where there were way more people on that train. It's a wonder more people didn't die, that they have the technology and they had actually implemented it, like you said, going in the other direction. You know, Gus, anytime I travel, and I don't know if it's the same for you, Chris, you travel overseas, and the train systems in Europe, in Japan, so much better, way more, the number of high-speed trains they're way more than what we have here. And it's frustrating to me when I think about the reasons why we are so behind when it comes to train technology in this country. What's going on here, Gus?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you talk about the European systems. My wife and I had occasion to go there, and this is over 30 years ago, but we had a Euro pass. We were in Germany, we were in Switzerland, France, England, and I was kind of taking a busman's holiday, and I noticed that the track conditions kind of deteriorated with each country. So they're not all pristine. Secondly, look at France has a square area of like 240,000 square miles. Texas has 268,000 square miles. We're certainly a much bigger country. And you don't have that kind of traffic between the city centers. Cleveland to Indianapolis is not exactly a big, bustling corridor compared to, let's say, New York to Washington, where you've got the Accelas going 125 miles an hour.
So let me ask you this.
That makes sense.
So, Gus, when you hear people like billionaire Richard Branson talking about these Hyperloop One, then you talk about spending these billions of dollars on being able to get from, let's say, New York to Washington in 29 minutes. How ambitious and how realistic do these projects sound to you?
They're very ambitious and they're not quite realistic. I looked up Hyperloop One, and they've raised like $245 million for this to start working on this system. Keep in mind that the train we're talking about had been recently upgraded to the tune of $800 million. Let me give you some other statistics, because math is our friend. About high-speed rail. They keep talking about this train that derailed as being a high-speed train. Well, it's going to go up to 79 miles an hour. Not 79 miles an hour all the time. It takes 3 hours and 20 minutes to go from Seattle to Portland, so that's an average speed of 53 miles an hour. In its heyday, the 20th Century Limited went from New York City to Chicago in 16 hours for an average speed of 60 miles an hour, and that was 80 years ago. So it's nice. Maglev is another type of high-speed train they've talked about. That technology came about in the 40s. I remember in the 60s that was going to be the next best thing, and it's still not here. as far as our rail infrastructure, I have to say, I've got here the American Society of Civil Engineers infrastructure grade card. They put this out every year. For 2017, aviation is a D. Roads is a D. Transit is a D minus. But rail is a B. And I have to make the observation that rail is pretty much private enterprise. Those others are public. So I'll let you and your viewers draw any conclusions. 2017, Burlington Northern Santa Fe is planning on spending $3.4 billion in capital expenditures, 70% on replacement and repair. And those are their own dollars. Those aren't federal dollars. That's money that they have earned. So we have a pretty good rail infrastructure system, but when I can take a plane and be in Chicago, even with all the TSA security, in far less time than I can take a train. And because I'm in the middle between New York and Chicago, trains to Chicago come through Cleveland at 2 in the morning.
Right.
You know,
right.
It's romantic. I mean, I was, as a kid, we had American Flyer trains, and I wanted the shiny Santa Fe passenger train with the war bonnet engine. Who cared want freight? Freight's clunky.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's a romance to it, but it's not. Like I said, New York to the Northeast Corridor, there's a purpose.
Well, maybe what we'll see come out of this, if there's anything positive that comes out of this, is a renewed conversation about continued investment in our rail system. And, like you said, it's compared to some of the other public transportation options, it's actually being graded better. Maybe it can become even better than what we have right now.
Yeah, and I think it depends where you're grading too, whether where you may be, where Mr. Ubaldi is, or here in New York City, for instance. You've got Penn Station, which needs a complete overhaul. You've got all the tracks coming into Penn Station that are being basically shut down or rebuilt over a few months period. So it depends on where you are in the country, but something that definitely needs continued attention. And of course, with that comes billions of dollars in funding.
Gus Ubaldi, thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
You're welcome.